Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Young. I am the Li Ka-shing Professor of Medicine and Cardiology here at a medical school. Welcome to our second annual Distinguished Lectureship with the Stanford Initiative for Entrepreneurial, Resilience, and Well-being, or SEIR, we call it. We launched it in May of 2024 with the support of the vision of the Li Ka-shing Foundation, as well as the Selina Child Foundation. We basically remain dedicated to a singular and vital mission that cutting-edge technology must be matched by the internal strength of the people building it. Technology alone cannot do the work. As we move into our second year, our core inquiry remains unchanged. What attributes help entrepreneurs be resilient and endure hardships while maintaining a healthy mindset? We recognize that the journey to success is rarely a straight line. It is often accompanied by significant challenges and setbacks. So at SEIR, we define resilience as a capacity to adapt, recover, and grow stronger from stress. Because a lot of times we think stress will make us weaker, but we think that with stress, we actually get stronger every time. And how to do that is our mission. We believe that by understanding how to leverage our mental and physical strengths, we can help entrepreneurs turn the greatest challenge into unique opportunities for innovation. So SEIR's goal is to bring awareness to the fact that well-being is not a luxury. It is a foundational requirement for success. To achieve this, so SEIR, we organize it and unites two of the expertise on campus. We always sometimes don't know that from one side of the campus to the other. But we have two powerhouse centers, obviously the Stanford Musallam Center for Biodesign under Professor Josh McGower and Doug Wright is here. And also the Stanford Technology Venture Program, STVP, under Professor Tom Byers, Chuck Aisley, Rita Catilla, and also Mike Lepek. So by combining these relevant clinical insights with entrepreneurial strategies, we are researching and developing programs to empower community to navigate their journeys with confidence and endurance. So we want to put in a plug. We're going to be launching an app that will study resilience in the next month or so. So look out for that particular flyer or on our website. I think that will be very helpful to really help you understand and help us understand how resilience can be built and can be built forward. So today we are privileged to host a speaker who epitomizes the spirit of resilience and grit. The speaker's path reflects exactly the kind of resilience in practice that we strive to understand here at SEIR. His journey reminds us that the hardships we overcome are often the very experiences that define our greatest successes. To introduce our distinguished guest and share more about the intersection of health and leadership, please join me in welcoming the Dean of the Stanford School of Medicine, Lloyd Minor.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to this wonderful venue and to what I know is going to be an exciting discussion this afternoon. There's so much to appreciate about the Stanford Initiative for Entrepreneurs, Resilience, and Well-being. It plays a vital role in the innovation ecosystem that we've built at Stanford University. We have a tremendous legacy of innovation here at Stanford. Both the Stanford Musallam Center for Biodesign and the Stanford Technology Ventures Program can boast impressive results. Both programs do an excellent job of sharpening ideas and providing specialized expertise needed to turn a novel concept into a marketable product. With this collaboration, we fill an important gap, helping aspiring entrepreneurs navigate the ups and downs of startup culture, not only to achieve success, but also to maintain mental and physical well-being. I want to thank the Li Ka-shing Foundation for the generosity and support in making this multidisciplinary effort possible. We have a very special guest joining us this afternoon for our second annual Distinguished Lecture. It's my honor to introduce Garry Tan, President and CEO of Y Combinator. Garry joined YC in the fall of 2023 after founding Initialized Capital, a very successful venture capital fund. Garry was one of YC's first partners and funded and advised many iconic companies, including Coinbase, Instacart, and many others. In YC's early days, Garry also served as a designer and engineer. He also wrote software, created Bookface, the internal network that connects YC's alumni founders to this day. Possibly most importantly for today, Garry is a Stanford alum. Throughout his career, Garry has met hundreds of entrepreneurs at every stage of the business life cycle. I can't think of anybody better to share his insights on what makes a successful, resilient, and healthy entrepreneur. Garry will be sitting down for a conversation with SEIR co-lead Anastasia Ntracha. She's a health tech entrepreneur with founder and product leadership experience across women's health, autoimmune conditions, and baby tech in the US and Europe. Anastasia was previously a Stanford Biodesign Innovation Fellow developing a minimally invasive oncology device. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Garry and Anastasia.
Thank you, Dean Miner. Thank you, Dr. Young. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you, Garry, for being willing to go a bit deeper with us today. So at SEIR, where I co-lead with Andreas Ward out of Stanford Biodesign, we spend a lot of time researching and asking founders this deceptively simple question. What does it take to build things that matter without breaking yourself in the process? So we gathered all those insights and experiences, and we're piloting a novel curriculum that has 3 phases, and we're going to use these 3 phases to frame the conversation for today. So the agenda for today is we're going to start from Discover, where we're going to learn a bit more about Garry's story and his definition of resilience. Then we're going to go to Explore and hear more about the strategies and patterns he sees across hundreds of YC founders. And lastly, we're going to go to Embody and see how identity, culture, and system design come together. So to kick us off with Discover, Garry, if we pause all those wonderful titles of YC CEO and investor and founder, and I ask you, who are you? What feels most important for you to share with us today?
I guess the unusual thing, well, first off, Anastasia, Dean, STVP, thank you so much for bringing me back to the farm. And it's actually honestly quite surreal to be here because when I look at this audience and it's full of a great many, frankly, like I think we have students, grad students and students, and I look at you and I see myself. Like we are not different. We're the same. I feel like I was in your shoes just yesterday, and for you guys to use this term distinguished is blowing my brain right now. I just can't. Like, okay, this is very surreal. But at the same time, like I think there's a lot of things that maybe it's just the setting, maybe it's coming back to the engineering quad where I spent a great many nights in the labs, working on various projects. Right now at this moment, like I kind of feel like the 18, 19-year-old freshman that like rolled down Palm Drive and was moving into Lauro right now, and I think the most important thing that I wish I could do, like one of my favorite questions for people on my YouTube channel is, what do you wish the 18 to 22-year-old version of you knew right now, given what you've been through? And first off, I would say, like, if you're in my shoes, like, actually, it's going to be okay. Like, you're already in rarefied air. In full transparency, I had a pretty rough childhood, and I didn't realize this. Like, I wish that I had taken an ACE score. This is Adverse Childhood Experiences test. It's available on the internet. At the risk of sounding too therapy-pilled, like, I was pretty resistant to even the idea that talk therapy or that the psychology profession had something to teach me. My childhood was very difficult, in that I'm an Asian American, child of Chinese immigrants. In full transparency, I mean, that was like what drove me to achieve in a lot of ways. Like I viewed I grew up actually right over the bay in Fremont. My mom was a nurse assistant. My dad was a foreman in a machine shop. And my father struggled with alcoholism. And for me, like getting a B might mean like a punch to the face. And so that was one of the things that was like a real part of my life. And now that I've come to be the CEO of like an important institution, I realize now like so many Asian American people of all ages have actually come to me and said, "Oh, that's actually and unfortunately a part of our culture." At some I know that that's like the third part, but like
no worries.
I realize like that coming to Stanford, being able to look how beautiful it is, right? I remember going. I was a freshman in Florence Moore Hall, and just being able, like, I was so excited to start my new life. I viewed coming to Stanford as like sort of, how there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. Like this was my light, throughout up until I was 18 years old. I worked really, really hard. I needed to get straight A's. I needed to get high SATs. Like, I studied, I worked hard because I thought like I'm going to get to the end of the light. And then when I got here, I did it. Like I'm done. Like, all of that isn't behind me, and like none of it will affect me anymore. Like I've made it. And I guess like, the hard part was like, that wasn't true at all, actually. And it's kind of funny how as technology goes, we use technology to the sort of analogies and ideas from technology to understand humans. And so, I guess what I would say is, I think your 10, 20,000 hours of human learning. I mean, it's just like in AI, like you have machine learning, right? It's like this is your training set. And the cool thing is, you can't change your pre-training, but you can change your prompts and post-training.
Very interesting.
Which is very good. Like, this is great news. This is very advanced technology, actually. Do not neglect, like, I thought, like, oh, all I need to do is, like, do well in my CS classes. Like, I love CS 106X. I loved, like, all of, like, 107 was awesome, 108. All of these, like, foundational CS courses I thought were, like, the real thing. And then what I neglected was that, oh, there's, like, all this programming that happened from my childhood. And it came out in all sorts of ways, like, almost like every single time I was in some sort of business scenario later. So I could not, we all believe that we can compartmentalize, this pre-training, but it will come out sooner or later. And I guess, do you want to hear the story of like my 2 rage quits?
Well, maybe we can, before we get to that,
Please.
You can give us first your definition of resilience in the entrepreneurial
Yes.
context, and then let's see if this story is a resilience-defining moment for you.
That's a good question. Okay. I mean, I was thinking when you asked this backstage that we run across people who, it's not merely persistence, because persistence sometimes leads you down bad roads. This is why we actually really encourage people to pivot. I mean, I think it was Twain who said, if at first you don't succeed, try again, then quit. It's no use being a damn fool about it. And I think that's actually a really hard thing. Like, this requires discernment. And the weird thing is, like, we work with so many founders, and like the failure sort of, the sort of failure to be resilient happens in many different ways. One is obviously just giving up, like only aiming for like the brass ring, and if you don't get the brass ring immediately, give up, blame other people, blame yourself. Like, this is, I mean, it's just a bad thing to do, and yet it happens like quite common in our society. I like to say that, isn't this a, I can't remember what, there's a a show that's, I think it's a Rick and Mortyism maybe, or no, it's Adventure Time actually.
Okay.
In Adventure Time, they say, sucking is just the first step to not sucking. And I think maybe that's like the best idea of resilience I could probably say that definitely is true in all the founders who I've seen. You have to view it as a process, and you have to you have to be aware of your circumstance, and then like learn, right? Like, madness is doing the same thing over and over again. And so, being totally relentless but doing the same thing is a form of like self-torture. And so,
Exactly.
Sad to say, like that's actually one of the things that often, like as a YC partner, like that's my job. Like when we meet people 6 months, 9 months later, and they've been sort of stuck in a rut, like, and they come and they say, well, I've been doing the same thing over and over again for 9 months. The answer is like, do something else. Which sounds like, obviously, but, I think one really important aspect of resilience is actually finding your tribe and community. There's a thing we say at the end of YC. We have a talk that's Don't Die, and it isn't Brian Johnson. It's actually about, you need to actually, you need to surround yourself with people who lift you up, and then you can be totally real with. I think one of the big reasons why people just sort of, how startups actually die, they sort of die like, sorry to be lurid, but like choking victims. Like they find, you get something lodged in your throat, and you start choking, and you're a little freaked out, but like you don't want to make a scene. So then like people go into the bathroom, and then they're found later. And that's like my fear, and it's sort of like what we see, like the pressure to perform, the needing to be like in the status game and to be seen as like, what's funny about it is like it's a very interesting dichotomy to be at to be the speaker for a distinguished speaker series, but then I think the message a little bit is like, don't be so worried about being distinguished. Like, don't worry about the titles. I think it's much more important, like, what is the outcome? Like, what did we do for one another? And for startup founders in particular, on the first day of YC, you get a T-shirt that says, make something people want. I think that's actually a really important mantra, because that focuses you, right? Make something, and then the people part is actually like the other directed part. Like, entrepreneurship is very lonely, and then also not helpful to anyone if it's making something only for yourself. Like, when founders are not quite going to make it, often it's like, I need to solve my own problem, which is needing a startup. And that's not good, right? Like, we want to be other directed. And if we're in a community of other people for whom, like, it's not about, sometimes you go to these startup events and someone's like, oh, well, how's it going? And you can't say what's really going on. You have to say, I'm killing it. And the other person says, oh, I'm killing it too. And it's like, oh, we're killing it. And then it's like, you might as well not have been in that room. Like, don't even go to that room. Like, you don't need that. What you really need is just, a few people who you trust and they trust you. And let's have like a real honest conversation about like what's really going on.
That's very interesting, because in our interviews as well, it seemed that a lot of the founders were struggling with loneliness, but also this fear of showing their difficulties and being vulnerable, because they would look weak in front of their investors, in front of their peers. You being an investor, how do you encourage vulnerability, and also do you have any tips on community design in a way that founders don't feel so alone?
Yeah, absolutely. I recently joined Young Presidents Organization, and I find that fascinating, because you can take really, really smart people, and then you have to create a setting where that is the norm. And I guess I'm just obsessed with life-changing organizations that start with Y. Y Combinator, we try to do the same thing. So being able to put people into small groups of 6 or 8, sometimes 10 other founders. And then explicitly, it is like, we're not here to brag, to boast, to impress each other. We're here to figure out, like, what is the thing that is most frustrating, or what's the worst thing that happened to you this week? And it's not just that. It's not just like sort of complaining. Like, I think the much more important thing is like celebrating one another's wins. There's a very interesting thing that happens at YC where every week you have group office hours, and then the first few weeks everyone's just feeling each other out, and then by week 3 or 4, they start seeing what other people in that group are doing. And so if someone in the group gets like, we got our first $10,000 a month customer, and then next week it's like, oh, well, we've signed another one, we're at 20,000. And this doesn't happen in every group. And it's actually very interesting how spiky it is. Like, there are some groups where suddenly, like, every single founder in that group, because they were inspired by that first person who did it, they said, like, well, they're my friend, and we're in the same thing, and they did it, well, I can do it too. And then suddenly, by the end of that batch, like, your entire groups end up being really, really great. Like, the best companies in the whole batch are, like, in that group. I can't explain it, really. Like, I think that having people who lift you up, not having to impress one another, helping each other, and then, like, I think the most important is actually sort of hardest to get. It's like, you want to be around people who they raise the bar for you, right? And the great thing is, like, you guys are all at Stanford, so this has already happened.
Amazing, yeah. And then going a little bit back to your previous story about the death of startups, you've been also widely quoted saying that startups die when founders burn out, not when users churn. And we talked a bit before backstage about how founders really put their well-being as the last priority. Do you see across the YC founders similar reasons why they burn out? Do you see patterns in hardships and early signals where you see that a founder is going through that red line?
I mean, I think what's great is, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was definitely this sort of, I guess they call it hustle porn. It's just like, neglect your food and neglect your body and just like, code all day. And then in full transparency, like, I realized, like, that was one of my mistakes, actually. Like, I did that. Like, for my startup in 2008 to 2011, I did fully very unmanageable and not sustainable things at all. And I regret it, actually. It didn't help me in a very specific way, which is, aside from, like, not handling my ACE score from college, like, by the time I started my company, like, I would do like 20-hour days. I mean, I actually used modafinil, which would allow me to like not sleep. Like, I said, you know what? I'm going to put this startup on my back. I'm the hero coder I'm a CTO and hero coder at the company. I do all the big features. The stupid thing was, like, I did all the DevOps and SRE as well. So I basically worked like I did front-end design. I did design, front-end, back-end, and I was like the full stack. Like, wow. And the thing is, I burned myself out. And the other thing that happened was we got product market fit, and that was exactly the moment where I needed to switch into someone who was setting up other people in my organization. And I was so addicted to the feeling of being like the hero that I didn't do that, and it actually really hurt. Probably the biggest thing that was problematic, I mean, honestly, like, I probably didn't have the time to do therapy and coaching before my startup. So one thing I would say is, like, to the extent that you have not started your startup yet, it is very, very good to try to, like, get as clear as possible before you start the startup, because you are not going to have time to figure out, like, what are the bugs in my pre-training. But what you should be trying to do, figure out what the bugs are, because they're going to come out during your startup. They came at my startup, so I'll tell you what my bug was. I had a really difficult relationship with my father. He was an alcoholic. Thankfully, he's more than 10 years clean and sober, which is such a blessing. But yeah, which is incredible. He just got his AA chip, which is incredible. What a blessing. But what that resulted in for me was that, of course, you're a startup founder. You're making decisions about, like, really high stakes decisions, like, this thing's happening. Our competitor did this. Like, they raised money from so-and-so, like, what do we do? Do we raise money now? Like, what feature do we do? Like, you know, the API just closed, you know, Facebook is closing their API, what do we do? Like, every day there's like some sort of horrible thing that's happening. And then for me, I didn't realize it at the time, but this was the bug or the bomb. It was that I only had two modes because of my childhood. It was self-abandon or my way or the highway. And that was sort of what I had to do in my pre-training. Like, me and my brother and my mom, like, because we had someone who was really, really, really overbearing, that was the only way that we could get our way. It was either like, let's do it the way Dad wants to do it, or like, we're gonna throw such a giant fit that like we get our way. And so, I mean, it sounds crazy. Like, you know, I wish that I could tell you that like when I was 18 and I was here at Stanford, I had any consciousness. I had no conscious awareness of this as the bug or failure in like my own pre-training. And it hurt me so badly in this startup. There would be times when I hired a really great designer, one of the best designers we could find, and you know, he went on to do great things. Like, you know, I would do this like thing with him. I would like self-abandon, and then at some point I would blow up at him, and it would be like laundry list of things. And then he stopped me, and he was like, "Garry, that was the most disrespectful meeting I have ever had in my entire life. What is going on?" And that was actually like one of the things that got me to realize, like, actually, like, you know, anyone watch Westworld? I went like, freeze all motor functions. I was like, what's going on here? Like, something is happening, right? And then, you know, how that manifested with my co-founder at the time was that exactly the same thing. Like, he wanted to, you know, turn it into Google Groups. I wanted to charge money for it. In retrospect, like, I mean, and the thing is, like, this argument doesn't matter now. Like, the startup, you know, ended up selling to Twitter for 20 million, and I'm very glad that my co-founder was able to like steer it to a really great exit for our investors and for our engineers. Sorry to the users if you were using Posterous. I'm sorry about that. But you know, I'm glad that happened, but I did not show up for him. Like, our startup could have been so much bigger. Like, it could have been like 10 to 100x bigger. Like, it sort of came up in the age of social media, and it was actually around for about a year earlier than Instagram. The funny thing was, like, the day Instagram came out, that was the day that our growth flatlined, which is fascinating, right? And so, I mean, that's a very tangible, like, your startup will work and it'll work. Like, we built it to a top 200 site at the time. We'd raised our Series A from Redpoint. We had about 10 engineers. Like, we had our, you know, sort of loft office at 16th and Mission in SF. Like, we were, you know, riding high. And then right at that moment, like, we didn't have the, well, I mean, I take responsibility for this. Like, I didn't have the emotional awareness of my own, you know, bugs. And so I actually burnt out. Like, so, I mean, and that's like one thing that really happened. It's, if you're not aware of, you know, your internal sort of default programming, then it will rule you, right? I think that's a Jung quote. You know, if you do not make the unconscious conscious, you know, it will rule you, and you'll call it fate. And so that's like probably the most important lesson in sort of that I hope people take away, actually. That, like, these things are not fate, but you also have to like do the introspection. And then once I was able, I mean, this is like maybe 8 years of therapy that was, I have a somatic therapist who like really focuses on trauma, that like, where does it go in the body? There's a great book called Body Keeps the Score. And you know, when I first found out about it, I was very skeptical. I was like, what is this stuff? I don't really believe any of this. Like, and over time, what I've realized is, oh, no, like, I actually, and I use this every day now, like, I can actually spot the sort of, you know, basic programming happen, and then my face gets hot. In particular, that happens to be my own trigger. And in the past, it's like, oh, I'm gonna ignore this, like, you know. And then the problem is, I I think there's like sort of a horse and a rider. And so, the interesting thing for me is like I'm able to hold it together really, really well because I have a very fierce rider. I mean, I think that was the imprint from also my father, is that like I have a prefrontal cortex and a language center that can say like, use reasoning. It's like, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we need to do. And then there are all these other parts of your body that your cortex, all the different parts of your brain sort of like interface with, the rest of your body. And so the interesting thing about that was like I had self-abandoned so much that the rest of my body, the horse in my case, when I was working on my startup, was in revolt. And I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep. And you read about this stuff. It's like psychosomatic, like, this isn't real. And it's like, oh, no. It's very real. It's very real because it is conflict like from outside, like within your own body. And, it's sort of, it's like a strike, actually.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for like sharing so openly about therapy and doing the inner work and self-awareness. It's super critical and important for future founders also to hear that. And it's true, this connection of body and soul. And I would like to ask you then, now with all the hats you're wearing, do you have a personal operating system with like physical and mental well-being habits and routines in your calendar, or how do you stay grounded and effective?
Well, famously, I love sauna and cold plunge. So I think sauna is, it just really, it actually like releases toxins from the body, which is fantastic. And then cold plunge is very interesting because I think that our bodies are so comfortable. We're so well taken care of by modern society that your body actually kind of needs to be shocked a little bit. And the sort of endorphins and sort of how I feel like after a really good cold plunge, like there's really nothing like it. And so, I don't know, that I also really like, sound healing and meditation. So I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but I do about an hour of sound healing meditation every single week. And that helps a lot. I think that this horse and rider, like it all sort of comes back to integration. I really love psychotherapy around parts work, and because there's a sort of idea that like, we are very, very integrated people, and like actually I don't think so. Like personally, my experience is like I definitely contain multitudes, and I suspect other people do too. And then maybe because of my pre-training, like I'm, a little bit more disintegrated than I should be. But like this is also something that I can spend time on. I can be aware of it. I can try to basically spend specific time. Like I think that my meditation time is actually the specific time where I allow, myself to integrate all these different parts of me. And then if I can do that, if I get enough sleep, if I eat well, if I do the Brian Johnson don't die regimen, then actually like the hardware means that my software runs so much better. I can be better for other people. I can slow down. I can notice when my face feels hot, and then I can make a different choice. And then the feeling of it actually is like metaprogramming, like metaprogramming of the self. Like this is, it is very funny to think about. Like, do we have free will, or is it all sort of written in the stars? And at least my visceral experience is that the more integrated I am, the more I can be conscious and often like right. Weirdly, like, the reading about ChatGPT psychosis kind of blows my mind, because like I think that if you are very intentional about your use of ChatGPT, it is the exact opposite. Like to have an always-on advisor who, that's what AI training and alignment, done well, like really does, is like it's sort of there and it wants to try to help you in whatever way it might. And to have that on tap, like, I can say that like my wife and I started using it, and both of us have been able to get a lot better at like communicating with one another. Things that might be like fights don't have to be fights. It might actually be like, oh, okay, well, after taking a beat, like, we go off into our rooms and we like type into ChatGPT and like, hey, this is happening. What's going on here? we can actually come back together. And I'm sure people here, who here? I won't make people raise their hands, but like I'm certain people in this room have tried it, and if you haven't, like I actually really do recommend it because having, that is an interesting moment right now. That like that is new. That is actually something. I was with Sam Altman, maybe late last year talking about it, and he said that was one of the most remarkable things about ChatGPT. That was totally unexpected by the OpenAI team in the last year. Use cases like that.
Would you give us your favorite prompt?
I don't know. I guess I often just ask like, if I feel like I'm being unfair, like I just ask that, and it'll tell me. I don't know. I don't know about your. It depends on your memory and like I find that memory is very interesting. Here's a very crazy thing I did. I took years in my 8 years of notes that I took. Like I would have a reflection from all of my therapy sessions. I just dropped it into ChatGPT actually.
Wow.
But it's actually amazing. Like at this point now, it knows, it has like it knows like what's going on for me. And I mean, it is able to use that memory in like sort of all the things that might come up where I feel like I might not present as well or be the best person that I could be. So I mean, it's a big risk. I better turn on two-factor authentication for my OpenAI now. But I say it only because like I've gotten so much value out of it. And I think this is like the worst that the models will ever be. So I'm a really big fan of memory, and I think we're sort of in this brand new age of using. I think it mirrors for me like I use my prefrontal cortex and language centers to try to get things to be better. And then now that part of my brain isn't. It's the wrong thing to say. It's like more powerful. It is actually like more able to integrate, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, that's super interesting, and it's definitely a new era in front of us on how we're using these tools. I'm going to take you to a different topic, and another resilience modulator we saw in our work was motivation. And I think it ties perfectly with what you said about YC focusing on the why. So would you mind sharing what was like your initial motivation into starting something on your own, and how did this motivation change as you were going through some low points?
Well, I guess I have to admit, growing up without a lot of money, I wanted money. But at the same time, like, I think that like that, what's great is like, I feel like God has been very, very generous with me and our family. And so at this point, like, along the way, that makes something people want mantra turned into something that did solve the money problem for me, which my mentor, Paul Graham, has this, I think that's one of the turns of phrases that like drew me to his essays, actually. Like he talks about, look, like doing a startup is sort of the one thing where you could solve the money problem by working really, really, really hard for, I think he wrote this in probably 2005. So, this was thinking about like these tiny little exits that, he like, basically he said, you can work really, really hard for 2 years and like, do the work of like 20 years in those 2 years, and you could solve the money problem. And I think that was very of a time because, those small exits don't really happen anymore. In the meantime, actually, it's easier to solve the money problem just by going to work at big tech, which was not true in 2005. Big tech did not pay the type of salaries it does today. And so actually, I think everything's interestingly a little bit like shifted from when I started my company. Like I thought, I want to solve the money problem. And then along the way, I discovered like making something people want is actually a calling that transcends like your own material wants. Being able to recognize in the person that you're sitting across from, like what do they want, what do they need, what are things that, my two hands and the two hands of my team, what could we create for someone else that gets them to their goals, allows them to feed their family, like learn, I don't know, it's like, in health tech. It's incredible. It's, people get to live lives whereas like it would have been taken by death. Like these are really profound things that, we're capable of doing. And we're, being at Stanford is awesome because like this is sort of the land, it's like almost, it's a Schelling point, like this is where people who want to do that kind of thing come together. And so I think that's just very, very powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And do you feel like different types of motivation make founders less or more resilient from your experience as well in YC?
Yeah, basically, extrinsic motivation just doesn't sustain. Like even like the solving the money problem, like, man, there's so many other ways to solve the money problem than like trying to start a startup these days. So I guess here's a very interesting thing that I've learned from being very, very addicted to Claude Code in the last week or so. I stopped coding in 2014, 15, about 10 years ago. And then I picked it up about 9 days ago. And then in the last 9 days, I've produced like 40,000 lines of code. And this is like probably bad because it was like after dinner, like 6 p.m. to like 2 a.m. Like I was not doing my don't die protocol properly. I'm sorry, Brian Johnson. And but like the result was one person, me, sitting in front of Claude Code, created basically a code base that I took like $5 million and a dozen engineers 2 years to create, and it's better than that thing. Actually, it's fully tested for one thing, and I think we're at sort of this very different moment where the technology is still there, it's still important, but it's about to become a lot less important, and what's about to become a lot more important is your ability to feel, to be a designer is like to sit across from someone and to feel what they feel, to understand oh, they're trying to get promoted, they don't want to be fired, maybe they want to teach their kids something, whatever that motivation is, to be able to have that, to take off the hat of I need to solve my own problem of being a startup founder, and to wear their hat, to walk a mile in their shoes, and then to translate that into something that actually solves their problem and solves their needs. That's way, way more important, and that's agency, and then it's taste, right? And which is prompting and evals.
Yeah, that's really validating to hear. And as you said, especially in health tech, there are so many other motivations with patient impact and doing good that really sustain founders. And now I'll take you to the embodied space, the last part of our conversation. And we saw what helps resilience, what hurts resilience, but this doesn't act in a vacuum. It is also affected by identity and the context in which founders are building. And we saw in our research that identities such as gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, immigration status can really change the entrepreneurial game and tilt it one way or another. For some, it could be a boost of confidence and access to networks. For others, it could be facing bias or financial precarity. Would you mind sharing in your entrepreneurial journey which identities have shaped more positively or negatively the outcome?
Let's see. Look around in tech. I guess the interesting thing is I never felt. Being an engineer, growing up in the Bay Area, being Asian American. In full transparency, I actually wasn't sure if I could get into Stanford. So when I got in, I was very, very pleasantly surprised, and I'm glad. It changed my life. It's an incredible debt to Stanford that I, would love to be able to repay someday. It's incredible. I guess I do recognize not everyone is on a level playing field. And so, at YC, that's one of the reasons why we decided to increase the amount of money to give to people. YC started with only, when I did YC back in 2008, they gave us $12,000. So that was basically, if you had a family, you probably couldn't do it. If you had any needs whatsoever, if you had poor parents who you needed to support, if you had siblings who you're still putting through school, anything like that, it's just starting a company wouldn't be for you. So I feel really proud about YC. You don't have to have any traction. You don't have to have any connections. You go on the internet and fill out ycombinator.com/apply. And we will try to give, like, to me, like, I think that merit and meritocracy is a very, very, it's like a slur that people are starting to treat it like a slur. And I don't want that. Like, I think that you can simultaneously agree and believe that you cannot achieve a perfect meritocracy, but at the same time, you can also believe and try to achieve it. And then if you can do both, hold those two like opposing ideas in your head, like that's sort of the world, that's the best that we could possibly hope for. So I'm not so stupid as to like claim that getting into YC is a meritocracy. It clearly isn't, and maybe and I cannot promise that it will ever be. But I can say like we are trying, and there are so many like sort of measures. I think there are two things. One is like, I'm a big fan of the Rooney Rule. I practiced it at Initialized Capital. I think that we also do things like that in selecting people to interview, but we do not change the standard. Like the standard is the same, and I think that's how you hold this idea that like it is not a meritocracy, but we should try to establish one, because if you do not have the standard, then like what are we saying? Are we saying that like identity and where people came from matters even more than what people are capable of doing? Like, at the risk of being controversial, like, I don't want that to be controversial. I want to say like excellence above all. And then, but like, we should try to level the playing field, everything up until the standard. And I think that gives people dignity, right? Because without doing that, like you risk tokenization. So anyway, like thanks for, that's what I believe, that's what we are trying to do. And I think that that's the society I want to live in. And that society, I think that, brings back the SAT, because the SAT, it turns out, is one of the greatest equalizers in terms of socioeconomic background and ethnicity and so many other things. And so I don't know if I exactly answered your question. Like, I don't think that like being an Asian American man hurt me. But I also recognize like, hey, there are a lot of different backgrounds, and it is not like we can try to make it a level playing field, we can try to make it a meritocracy, but it is not any of those things.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for sharing your perspective. Another problem we saw that founders voiced was how, from the investment side, really getting access to an investor is all about warm intros and getting that credibility from a network. So a lot of founders that come from outside these networks are finding it hard to go there. Have you seen from the experience in Initialized Capital, how are you maybe judging the credibility of the founders, and like how are you getting access to all these founders?
I guess two things. Well, one thing is like, that's why YC is so cool. Like, you don't have to know anyone. You don't have to have gone to any schools. You don't have to like know anyone. You just apply. Everyone has access to a phone. You record a 1-minute video. Like, I love how equalizing that is. We just celebrated, our most recent IPO was Equipment Share, and the Schlacks brothers, the two co-founders, they're not cut. They escaped a cult in the middle of the country. They did not go to any of the top schools. Like, they came from like a definition of like a non-traditional background, but they rang the bell on the NASDAQ, right? And so I'm super proud of that. Like, I actually, the other thing that's interesting, going back to Claude Code, like if people apply to YC now, we actually now give people the option to upload a transcript of their chat with Claude as they vibe coded, or, honestly, like, yeah, it's, I neglected to say that the 40,000 lines of code I made, I didn't write a single line. I was directing it, I read all the code, I like did a lot, it went off on like weird architectural things, and I was like, don't do it that way, do this way. But like, I think that that's actually a very interesting equalizer. Like, your ability to actually, like, it's, the Claude Code chat, we think, is a little bit like the SAT. It just like you can look at how someone prompts, and you can understand, like, do they have a theory of mind of the user? Can they think ahead? Are they logical and reasonable? Do they have a systems understanding of like what's going to happen? Like, I mean, I spent like an entire day on concurrency, which is like one of the most annoying problems if anyone's had to do multi-threaded programming. It's like, oh yeah, this is one of the most annoying things that you have to do. But I think that someone who looked at my chat log would be like, oh yeah, that person has taken that Stanford class, actually. So I don't know, I'm always on the lookout for things that are not your resume, not what you look like, not what your connection is. Like, it should just be like, what is your raw ability? And then I think at this sort of dawning of AGI, like, it's more that than anything else. It's like, what can you do? Like, can you inhabit the body of the user? Can you derive, like, real understanding of what they want, and then actually manifest it? And then now the roadblocks to you doing that are like non-existent, at least for software. I mean, we'll see if Periodic Labs and these other LLM companies can apply it to science. We sure hope so, because I can't wait for unlimited fusion energy. That sounds great, sign me up. Someone in this room might invent it. Someone on this campus right now might be working on it, I'm very optimistic for the future, and like a lot of the future is in this room, and it's within a couple square miles of where we're sitting right now.
Amazing. And is there any way YC is also evaluating the resilience of the candidate founders or monitoring their well-being in any way? Definitely.
I mean, I think the number one thing on our partner side is like, we just have to stay in touch with people, and the great thing is, like, AI is actually helping us do that to a much greater degree. I mean, I'm sort of experimenting with, like, I actually think that we should maybe do a YPO-style program for post-Series A. And so that's one of the experiments that I'm thinking of doing soon.
Do you see differences between, like, first-time founders and repeat founders in how they handle the resilience and well-being?
I mean, the interesting thing is, like, yes, like, I think that's why second-time founders can be so great. Like, they basically have seen all the things that could go wrong, and they can sort of skip ahead. And then what's interesting is, like, second-time founders, period, are by definition really resilient, because even if the first one doesn't work, they're like, I'm going to go back in that cave and I'm going to do it again. That's insane. But founders are insane. It requires, like, a little bit of irrationality to want to say, like, I was there, what does Elon say? Like, it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. I mean, to go through that and then to say, I'm going to do it again, is pretty wild. I mean, one of the crazier stats that we realized at YC recently, like, 99.3% of people who apply to YC do not get in any given batch, which is very crazy, and I feel horrible about it. And then about half of the batch has been rejected previously, and then the average number of times they were rejected, if they were rejected in the batch previously, they were rejected 3 times. So it means that they were rejected, they received 3 mortal ego wounds before finally getting in. And then actually we should track the stat, like, what are the outcomes for the people who were accepted immediately versus rejected 3 times.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe they build the resilience through that.
We're going to find out. Actually. I need to ask my chatbot.
And then you mentioned before a little bit about the tech hustle culture. We see sometimes the 24/7 availability being glorified or romanticized. How do you see this culture affecting, even positively or negatively, the founders today?
Yeah. I mean, I will say having children changed everything for me. And I think, what's interesting is, like, actually, if I was going to be a father or, like, had become a father before I started my startup, I wouldn't have made any of the mistakes around, like, taking off-label substances and, coding for 20 hours at a time. Like, I would have needed to learn to manage, to delegate, to communicate with my team, to hire the best possible people. And that would have brought me much farther to success versus not. And I think that's sort of the trap. Yes, when you're going from 0 to 1, like, you have to do things that are unscalable. That's like, page 1 of coming to YC is like, do things that are unscalable. And then the thing is, after that, after you've done it and like you start getting product market fit, then you got to scale it. So don't forget that second step.
Yeah, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, I would say.
YC itself is often a sprint, but like after that, it's like marathon time.
And then if we stick to the part that resilience is partly about structures and systems, what would you like to see change in the next couple of years at a systemic level, and what's the role of investors and accelerators to that?
I guess the most controversial thing I would say is like, I really hope that more investors spend more time thinking about it, actually going back to the meritocracy point. Like, I think that much has been made of like investor bias around, all of these demographics, and I think they're probably true. Like, I have seen age discrimination. I actually have a case of that right now. Like, there's a company that is growing extremely fast, and then when I look at it, it's like, oh, like, if they were like 22-year-old Blue Flames, like, they would have like 8 term sheets right now. What's going on? And I think like, I'm seeing resilience in those founders right now, because they're like, you know what, like, we don't need investors. We're profitable. Like, actually, it's their loss. Like, maybe they will beg to buy some secondary later when we're making hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm like, yes, that is the kind of resilience. Like, the systems are not fair. The systems will never be fair. There are some people who will try to make it a little bit more fair. But, given that, like, you still have to choose to run your race. And it might not mean that that particular founder will raise venture capital, but it will mean that it doesn't matter, and they're going to ring the bell on the NASDAQ anyway.
And what are your personal support systems now?
I mean, obviously my family and my wife. I wish that I got a personal trainer even when I had like no money. I should have done that a lot earlier. I thought of it as a crazy luxury, and then what I should have thought about it, like, I as a lover of technology, I always have to have the brand newest MacBook Pro. My argument is that a great samurai must have the greatest sword. And I believe this like since I was graduate at 22. I was like, whatever the newest MacBook Pro is, like, I got it. I just traded in every single newest iPhone, newest MacBook Pro. And then I realized, like, sometime like maybe 5 years ago, I was like, oh, I treat my tools like that, but I really treat myself not like that at all. And so it's pretty obvious, like, I should have done that earlier, and I would have been able to just be my best self. And I mean, there's a point that I think is very important. It's like not just about you. Like, it's not just about it's not just about well-being. It is not like a nice to have. It is actually deeply integrated into whether or not your startup and what you try to do in your life will be successful. Because, going back to my mistake, like, I mistook my company for just me and me being a hero and coding everything and doing it all myself. And, but also, like, that came from my pre-training. It's like, I had such a hard time with my parents and my upbringing. I had to be that for my family growing up. Like, I had to, fill out the resumes, or like mail the resumes in, those 8.5 by 11 like manila folders to try to help my dad get a job because he kept losing his job. We moved around like 10 times as a kid. Like, I got amazing at helping my dad get a job. Like, I had to like overfunction in such fundamental ways. And it made me a great startup founder right at the very beginning when you had to do unscalable things. Because like, I didn't know what scaling things meant. I thought it meant like you do it all, right? And then it was right when it was like we had product market fit and we needed to scale it, even to just stay in the game with Instagram, which had come out, like, it all fell apart, right? And like, when I work with founders, I want them to be thoughtful and to do this kind of work beforehand, before they start their startup, because once it starts, it's too hard. Like, you can still do it and you can still get an exec coach and things like that, but it's a little bit too hard. And then the decisions that you make with you and your co-founder and your team, they determine whether or not you get product market fit, whether you keep product market fit. It is a perfect marketplace out there. And everything compounds. Like if you are a better communicator, if you're more integrated, if you're more perceptive, if you're more in touch with yourself, if you're more in touch with the team, you can hire better people, you make better decisions, you make 10,000 better decisions in the first year. And it's like year by year, like, you know, my theory would be like, if you can handle this and be a better person, then your team will be better and you'll make better decisions. Your product and service will be better. Your business will be better and you will succeed.
Such an important reminder to treat our well-being as a non-negotiable, and you know, a team is only as strong as its leader. So thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. To close us off, one last question. If you could uninstall one belief from every future founder in this room and replace it with a different question or practice, what would that be?
That my pre-training is my destiny. It's not true, you know. I feel like I'm living proof that, like, you know, earlier I was mentioning like I rage quit multiple things. I stopped rage quitting, which is good. Now it's stewardship and building time, and I wish I got to it earlier, but better late than never.
Thank you again. This has been really inspirational. Thank you for being so open.
Thank you so much, Garry and Anastasia, for this incredible discussion today. I think we best deserve another round of applause. So, thank you so much. My name is Ash Wellington. I'm the Executive Director here at Stanford Technology Ventures Program, and I'm so thrilled to have been able to co-host this today with our partners. Garry, the journey that you've shared with us, your wisdom, the fact that you're able to do so vulnerably, to show us that you know, success is marred with some programming glitches, some bugs, is certainly appreciated, and it is an inspiration to us all. I think personally I'm taking away that you can't change your pre-training, but you can change the prompt. I think that's very timely for us at the moment. This discussion has really exemplified the spirit of the SEIR program, that the spirit of innovation and resilience that we strive to nurture here at STVP, at Biodesign, and at SEIR is core to our mission here. So with that said, it is my pleasure to present you with this plaque.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
This is to recognise you as our SEIR Distinguished Lecturer, and to thank you for taking the time to come back to the farm to share your story with the community, both on campus and abroad. It's greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was so